Goodness. Right. Welcome, everyone, to the first of 3 webinars I'm presenting this summer. I'm Jason Stephenson, the Program Manager of Secondary Education in the Office of Standards and Learning at the Oklahoma State Department of Education. Thank you for giving up some of your summer break to be here. Our topic today is pop soda or Coke, boosting comprehension with questioning techniques. So I'm going to go ahead and share my slideshow. Maybe. Is it going to let me? There we go. And can everyone see my screen? I have nods. Share, continue to share. Great. All right. Like I said before, my name is Jason. If at any time the screen stops sharing, I'm off on some tangent, you need to get my attention, come off mute, let me know. You can also put things in chat. I do have 2 screens, so I should be able to manage things pretty well. But if you've got follow-up questions, requests for resources, etc., you can reach out to me through an email or a phone call, and I always try to be responsive within 24 hours, typically, of a workday. So this presentation is part of the framework that our agency uses with multi-tiered systems of support, OKMTSS. So it falls within the facet of evidence-based decisions within that tier 1 universal school-wide supports grounded in a core curriculum with standards for rigor. And you're choosing to be here today because you probably already read the session description, which is there on the screen for us to quickly recap. But here are our learning objectives. We're going to identify some different types of questions, determine some instructional strategies to assist students in asking and answering questions, and we will reflect on our current practices. So there will be a chance to do a little bit of discussion if you're willing to come off mute later. So this presentation is based on this resource that you see on the screen now, providing reading interventions for students in grades 4 through 9. It was published in March of 2022 from What Works Clearinghouse, which is part of the Institute of Education Sciences. So something at the federal level. They always put out such great guidance. Within this guidebook, white paper, they have 4 different recommendations. We're going to be looking at one of them in particular today, number 3, routinely use a set of comprehension building practices to help students make sense of the text. Now, they kind of cheated because that recommendation has 4 parts, and we're only going to look at one of those 4 parts today, part 3B, which is to consistently provide students with opportunities to ask and answer questions to better understand the text that they read. And before I proceed, what I want to do now that I've stopped sharing my screen is give you the link to that document so that you can have that full thing at your beck and call for this upcoming school year. Have any of you used this document already, or you have it already, or is this going to be new to you all? You can put your answer in the chat or come off mute. The Providing Reading Interventions Guide. So the link to it is in the chat. It is super helpful. Depending on the grade level that you teach, you might need to adapt things a little bit. It's focused on grades 4 through 9. I also have some previous presentations that are about some of those different recommendations, and my goal is to eventually develop a presentation about each one of those recommendations so that we can digest this entire helpful resource. So there's the link to it in the chat. Should you want to go into it more in depth later. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen again. We'll get back to the PowerPoint, but just wanted to make sure you had that resource. Okay, back to sharing. Can you see my screen? Still? Okay, great. So there are 3 steps outlined in the practice guide on how to carry out that 3B recommendation, which is one, to explicitly teach students how to find and justify answers to different types of questions. Two, to provide ample opportunities for students to collaboratively answer questions. So working together and not alone. And then teaching students to ask questions about the text while reading. So we'll look at what all three of those things look like um, as applied to an article that I have prepared. I don't know what it is about being an English teacher or just being the person that I am, but I do notice word tics, uh, phrases, expressions that people use. And I grew up in southeastern Oklahoma in the 80s and 90s, and around those parts and around that time, and the people I was around, we used the word pop for this carbonated beverage. You might come from a different part of the state or even nation, and you might call it a soda or a Coke. But I've got this article that I would like us to skim on the debate of these terms. And I'll give you about 5 minutes to read through part of it or all of it, depending on how fast a reader you are. And I want you to be thinking about these questions that I'll also put in the chat. What questions might you ask your students about this article? And what questions would your students have while they, uh, if they were to read this article, what questions would they have? So let me put the link to the article in the chat. Ta-da! There's the link to the article. It goes to a Google Doc. There is a link to where it originated from. And then what I also want to do is give you those guiding questions, instructions while we work on this. That'll be in the chat. One moment. So I'll put a little 5 minute timer on. While you're reading, if you have an epiphany and want to put a response in the chat, you can do that. But in 5 minutes, we'll also come off mute and have a quick little discussion. I'll be quiet so you can read. We still have 2 more minutes if you need it. You can read the whole article or just a few sections of it if you'd rather do that. Take 1 more minute if you need it, and then we'll chat about those questions I put in the chat box. So the questions are just a few up there. Gayla, take 5 minutes to skim this article. What questions might you ask your students about this article? And what questions would your students have while they read? Yep. Okay, and with that, it's been about 5 minutes. So I'd love for any of you to come off mute, share your thoughts or impressions of these types of questions I've asked you about. No, it's still pretty early for a summer morning. Anyone have ideas?
It would be fun to start with background info on what their families call soda, pop, or Coke to get kids excited about talking about it. And then I think they might have some vocabulary questions for at least my seventh graders might.
Okay, yeah. So those engaging questions to do a poll of the class, who says what, and then there might be some vocab questions. Yeah, there are some tough words in this passage. I think it could work even at the high school level too, and then middle school with some additional scaffolds. Thank you, Nicole. All right, someone else? What questions would you ask your students, or what questions might your students have about this passage?
I think they would definitely want to discuss the pop, Coke, and soda. I think that would be just a conversation starter for the class. So.
And then when we get into connecting it to comprehension, we'll look at some types of questions outlined in the practice guide that you all may already use and just didn't have a name for it, perhaps. Let me share my screen yet again. I want to make sure I never forget. All right, hopefully you can see the slides. And we'll just move right along. So this is that first recommendation from the practice guide, teaching students to find and justify their answers according to 3 different types of questions. The practice guide calls them right there, think and search, an author and me. You might know these by other names. They're also all outlined in the document I gave you. Also, these slides are already public, so I can give you access to these slides at the end of our time together. Feel free to continue to take whatever notes or doodles you need to stay engaged, but just want you to be aware I've got resources for you at the end. So write their questions can be defined as the information needed to answer the question is considered right there, because often the words in the question and the words used to answer the question are in the same sentence. We might call this a text-dependent question. In other types of trainings, you've maybe heard this called a level 1 question or an on-the-line question. I think it would help for me to show an example, and then maybe we can talk about what you've heard these called before. Instead of using questions for the passage, because we're going to actually develop our own later on in this session, I'm choosing to use an unhinged Grimm Brothers version of Goldilocks and the Three Bears for our sample passage and questions. So here's an excerpt. First, she tasted the porridge of the great big bear, and that was too hot for her. So a right there question based on that little excerpt might be, why did Goldilocks not eat the big bear's porridge? And the answer is right there on the line, as we see. It was too hot for her. So of these names, can you put in chat or come off mute and say if you've heard this type of question described before, like in a training? Do you call it a level 1 question with your students? Do you call it text dependent, or do you even have a particular name for this type of question? A category name. Okay, someone is in the chat, 3 responses. Text-based or level 1 or DOK1, text dependent. Okay, so this is what we're kind of used to calling these types of questions. So here's the next one. It's called think and search. In this case, the information needed to answer the question, it's in different parts of the text. So students need to think and search to find out the answer. It is still text dependent. Technically, I feel like it's still a level 1 question, but instead of the answer being on just one line of text, it's on many different lines. You got to look through the whole paragraph or whole passage to get the answer. So here's another sample. It's a much longer excerpt this time because of the type of question it calls for. So back to the unhinged Grimm Brothers version of Goldilocks. And then she went to the porridge of the little wee bear and tasted it, and that was neither too hot nor too cold, but just right. And she liked it so well that she ate it all up, every bit. But when she sat down in the chair of the little wee bear, that was neither too hard nor too soft, but just right. So she seated herself in it, and there she sat till the bottom of the chair came out, and down she came plump upon the ground. And that made her very cross, for she was a bad-tempered little girl. And so a think and search question based on this passage would be something like, what did Goldilocks do to the wee bear's porridge and chair? Now I'm going to come off sharing my screen, and I want us to talk about how would your students answer a think and search question. I've done this presentation 2 times this summer. This is my 3rd time, so I'm sort of expecting a response that I keep hearing. When students encounter a think and search question that has multiple answers, do they have a tendency on how they answer those questions? When it's a 2-parter? Any thoughts there?
They usually only answer one part.
That is what I keep hearing. So I want to hear from the experts here on this Zoom with me. How do we coach our students to not miss one of the parts? Or what rules or strategies do you give your students to answer those types of questions? Because I think the tendency is they answer the first part of the question, but not the second part.
I am helping the high school curriculum now, but I taught at 3rd and 4th grade. I was a principal at the elementary, and we had specific ways of showing them, okay, you find all parts of your question and then you go search for it. So it's a struggle for them. And it's just one of those things you just have to show them how. So
if there's a digital analog, a digital tool or an analog tool, be it a physical pen or pencil or highlighter or circle or underline, and then you have to go back into the passage to find both parts. Looks like in the chat, Lindsay said I'd model underlining the parts needed to be answered in a question or prompt. That is the support that some students need. Nicole says I asked them to highlight or reference in a verbal response the direct quote that supplies both answers. So okay, excellent. Any other thoughts or comments on these think and search questions before we move on? Let's make a prediction. What do we think the next question type is going to be? I think you all are probably going to be able to guess it while I share my screen again. Any thoughts? Any thoughts? So let's see, there's a main idea or inference, an inference. You all are dead on, except the What Works Clearinghouse Practice Guide calls it an author and me question. So to answer the question, the student must connect information in the text with information they learned or read previously. It's an inferential question. Other names for this might be a level 2 question or a between the lines question. You're having to read between the lines to make that inference. So here's an example. And maybe so I'm not reading so much. Do I have a volunteer to read the passage aloud for this one? If not, I'm fine to read it myself, but I thought I'd give you all an opportunity. It's kind of scary because it's so formally written. I'll go ahead and go for it here. Now the window was open because the bears, like good tidy bears as they were, always opened their bedchamber window when they got up in the morning. So naughty, frightened little Goldilocks jumped, and whether she broke her neck in the fall, or ran into the woods and was lost there, or found her way out of the wood and got whipped for being a bad girl and playing truant, no one can say. But the three bears never saw anything more of her. That is the conclusion to the unhinged version of Goldilocks and the Three Bears. And maybe like me, you have never seen this version before. It is quite different from the sanitized Little Golden Book version that I read in my childhood. So here's an inferential question or an author and me question based on this passage. What might be the author's purpose for the ambiguous ending to Goldilocks? Now, we don't have to discuss that as a group. But that would be an example of an inferential question. So those are the three question types that are outlined in the practice guide. Do you all have any thoughts, comments, questions about these three question types and maybe the role they play in your lessons or in your classroom? Do you feel kind of like I use a variety of these types of questions all the time already? So I think there's at least one other type of question that wasn't outlined in the practice guide. So that's where we're headed next. Okay, let's see. Lindsay said in the chat, I think using a variety of question types is great for scaffolding the student experience to the more in-depth questions. Absolutely. We talked earlier about those engaging questions we sometimes want to ask our students. And can you all see my full screen now? Yep. Okay. So a previous training that I had talked about levels of questions, and I've been referencing that all along. So the on the line or the many lines questions that are text dependent, that would be level 1. The inferential question or the between the lines question that I just mentioned, that'd be level 2. So beyond the lines is a level 3 question. This type of question is informed by the text, but you do not necessarily need to have read the text in order to answer it. So here's some examples of beyond the lines questions or level 3 questions based on Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Who do you consider a neighbor? What makes a place feel like home? And why do humans test the limits or break the rules? All of these students can answer on the outset before reading the text. And one idea that a teacher had at a presentation earlier this summer of the same topic was, you could give a level 3 question as a bell work response for students. Then we read the text, and then as their exit ticket, they answer that same question again, but this time it's informed by the text. And maybe their answer is deeper, maybe their answer changes, maybe they cite the text in their new response. So that was a new way of incorporating a level 3 question that I had not even thought to put on my slide. So I added it after the fact. So some guidance about this approach is teachers can model their thinking with a think aloud to show students how to find and justify an answer. We saw that in the chat box earlier from one of our teachers here today. And then teachers can show students how parts of the question can sometimes be found in the answer in the text. And then maybe students need to work on finding success by simply finding the answer first, and then later working with a partner to justify why they think their answer is correct. So we did this informally already, but maybe now we could have a tiny bit of conversation if we're willing. When and how often do your students answer these types of questions? So these are the 3 types as outlined in the practice guide, and then the bonus one, the Beyond the Lines one that I also shared. So I think I'm going to keep sharing my slides so you can see them, but would anyone like to come off mute and chat about responses here to this question? You can also put your answer in the chat.
I think the bonus question that you were just talking about, I use that a lot at the start of a literature when we're doing the engaging your background. We do a lot of that there's some kind of an engaging question that they come up with their own ideas from their own background. And then we visit back that question at the end of the literature text that we've read to see if their answer changes in depths or.
That's excellent. Thank you, Gayla. Any other responses? When and how often do your students answer these types of questions? We do have an objective within our Oklahoma Academic Standards for English Language Arts that's solely dedicated to students making inferences, and sometimes students struggle with that. Do y'all have any tips or tricks on helping your students answer inferential questions? We do have a response in the chat. Lost the chat though. I'm gonna have to stop sharing so I can see. Okay. So Nicole says in the chat, I most frequently use think and search type questions and probably need to incorporate the author and me more often. So this is a good reflection for us to have to kind of see the balance or the variety of question types that we can share with our students. I think we're ready to move on though. So there were 3 recommendations for implementing this. We finished one. We're going to move on to the second one. I will once again share my screen. Hopefully everyone can see. The second recommendation is to foster student collaboration to answer questions. So a little bit more guidance here for students, reminding students of what each question type requires for an answer, what to be looking for. If at any time students are struggling and you want to give them that added support, you could guide them to a particular page or paragraph or even sentence on focusing in on to find an answer to a question. And that would maybe just depend on what level your students are at, not only the grade, but just kind of their familiarity with answering questions, their confidence. You could also help guide students in sorting through relevant and irrelevant information and always praising students on what they did well in their answers. Maybe they got it halfway right. So instead of first pointing out what they did wrong, point out what they did do right, and then go from there. And then as students improve in their ability to answer questions, then bump up that complexity of the passages that you're sharing with them. So the What Works Clearinghouse Practice Guide did have a bit of a prompt card that guided students on how to answer an inferential question, which is what they call the author and me question. So the steps to them were to read the paragraph, connect the text to something you know through reading or experience, and then you've got to decide what you think the author meant, and then finally you justify your answer. So this didn't really make sense to me at first until I tried to apply it to the example question from earlier. So here's an example of the application. So remember our author and me question from earlier was what might be the author's purpose for the ambiguous ending to Goldilocks? So the step about reading would entail the student reading that final paragraph and maybe annotating it if you or a believer of annotation in your class. And then they need to connect it. And so here's kind of a think aloud process for that. All three possible endings for Goldilocks are negative. So in other fairy tales, characters with bad traits are usually punished for their evil decisions. So I have to make a decision about why this ambiguous ending. And so the decision that I came to as a fictitious student is the author wanted to teach the audience, which would be children, a lesson that people should respect others' property. Plus, Goldilocks should have obeyed her mother and completed the errand. So how can I justify this conclusion? Well, in that same paragraph, the narrator did describe Goldilocks as naughty. So having that called out directly helps back up my justification here. So this author and me prompt card, I wasn't a huge fan of it at first, but once I kind of walked through the steps with an example passage, I felt like that could maybe help some students connect those different steps for making an inference. I read so many books as a kid. My parents read so many books to me as a kid. Making inferences, making predictions came naturally to me. But we have to, and you all were probably the same way if you're English teachers, but we have to remember that all our students are not like that type of student. So sometimes they need these steps outlined a little bit more. So another collaboration idea that I found from the Florida Center for Reading Research, so FCRR, if you're not familiar with the Florida Center for Reading Research, please make yourself familiar. They've got lots of great resources, activities, and this is one that I stole from them. Students work in partners to read a passage with designated stopping points. You, as the teacher, would add in where those stopping points are, and you can just use a symbol like a big question mark in the margin, or the letter Q for question, or you can just have a little star that they know, oh, it's time to do a question. So working with a partner, student one would draw a physical prompt card that you would print off, or you could just write them on the backs of index cards and have some different decks or sets. And if you feel like that's wasteful, you could probably cut the index cards in half or in fourths, because all you need on those cards are those starter question words. Words like explain, infer, identify, compare, when, why. But the Florida Center for Reading Research has these little cards on paper for you already. You just have to print them out and cut them out. So student one draws one of those prompt cards, and they use that verb, that question word, to create a question. And student two answers it. If student two has trouble, then student one helps. And then they keep reading the passage. When they get to the next stopping point for a question, they reverse roles. And student two would draw a card, they would answer a question, and then, or would ask a question, and student one would then have to answer it. If we were in person, I had these cards at some workshops earlier this summer, and I had a participant draw a card, and we played this out. But I'll stop sharing my screen so that I can add the link to this resource in the chat for you all. But you all have any comments or questions about that activity that I just described. Have you ever done anything like that in your classes? So the resource to that Florida Center collaboration idea is now in the chat if you'd like to pull it up. And you'll see the comprehension question cards on pages 2 and 3. Okay. And is it Dahlia? Am I pronouncing that right? Said, I haven't tried this before, but would love to try. I also like that in this case, students are not answering the question in front of the whole class, they're with a partner. So you would be monitoring the room, going around, checking in, listening in, and helping out. But then the stakes are a bit lower and less stressful for those students who maybe wouldn't want to answer questions in front of the whole class, but if they've got a buddy, they could do that. Also, if groups of 2 seems too difficult and you'd rather do groups of 3 or groups of 4, you could totally do that as well. Nicole said, I love it too. This would help them understand the different question types since they have to create them. Also, if you feel like I don't want to use all 16 of these question stems to start with, you could just start with like 5 or 6 of them, and then you could add more to the decks as you feel like your students are building their confidence. Okay. Any other thoughts or comments before we move on? We're done with recommendation 2. We're ready to move on to the third and final recommendation 3, which is coaching students to generate their own questions. Hold on. And Daria is asking, would this be applicable to middle schoolers as well? I think that activity can work across the board, elementary through high school. I'd be curious to see what it would look like or how it would be different, but I think you could totally use this in secondary, both middle school and high school, even though it may seem a little elementary. Okay, I had trouble sharing my PowerPoint earlier, or now I'm having trouble. Let me try one more time. If not, I've got the Google Slides. Okay, here it is. Share. Uh-oh. Come on. Oh, and there's the prompt card example. Can everyone see? Everyone can see my screen? Great. All right, so we're ready for the third and final recommendation from the practice guide, coaching students to generate their own questions. So the temptation is maybe for us as the English teachers to be the keeper of all the questions, to feel the pressure to come up with really good questions, but we can share that responsibility with our students. They can come up with really great questions as well. They may need a little bit of coaching or guidance, but it really does help students have a better understanding of the text that they read. When they're coming up with their own questions, it can be more engaging that way. They're not answering the questions predetermined by the textbook or the curriculum, which sometimes there's some really great ones in there. But sometimes our students have great ones as well. This can lead to students' growth and their independence and confidence. So what you could do is provide them some question stems. This could go on an anchor chart that you leave on the wall. It could be on a handout that you give to your students and they, paste it, tape it into their notebook, or they just, whatever way you want to share it with them. Maybe you share it digitally through your Google Classroom or what have you. But giving them some question stems would be one way to start. Another way to think about leading students into coming up with questions of their own, you could do a whole class discussion and asking them and guiding them on the types of questions they could ask about a passage. Once you've introduced these different types of questions to them formally, they might be able to think about questions that way. And you could divide students into small groups. Different groups could be in charge of different types of questions, or you could ask every group, come up with a level 1, 2, and 3 question. And then as students gain more confidence in those small groups, then they could work with a partner where they're being responsible for more and more of the content of the questions. And then they could go on to making their own questions by themselves. And then you're just providing some feedback or monitoring to individual students on the types of questions that they're coming up with. So here's an assignment idea. This might look different for the grade level you teach, the students you have, but after students read a passage, be it a short story, a news article, an excerpt from a novel, maybe a chapter, you invite students to ask and answer some questions about what they've read. So an expectation might be that they're asking 3 right there questions and they answer one of the 3, giving students choice, what I think would increase their engagement. They could ask 1 think and search question and answer that one. They could ask 2 author and me questions, the inference questions, choose one of those to answer, and then ask 1 beyond the lines question if you wanted, and they can answer that as well. And then if that feels like a lot all at once, you could consider inviting students to ask and answer 1 type of question at a time. So on this first little passage, we're going to ask 3 right there questions, and we're going to answer one of our own, and we're also going to answer maybe one of our classmates or something. Then the next time they could work on think and search, and so on. So enough from me. It is your turn to apply what we've learned today. I'd like you to craft some questions of your own based on the Pop, Soda, or Coke article. So I'd like you to think about creating a right there question where the answer is on the line, a think and search question where the answer is on many lines, 1 author and me question where the answer is between the lines, so it's an inference, and then 1 beyond the lines, engaging question that is informed by the text, but you don't have to use the text to answer it. I'm going to put the prompt, the expectation on the screen or in the chat for you all. And I'm going to invite you to return to the article and come up with some questions. And then we're going to share out in maybe 3-4 minutes. We'll see how y'all do. Before I set you loose, do y'all have any questions for me? Okay, I'll let you work and then we'll come back together in a little bit. I have resumed the recording. We've had about 5 minutes to think of some different types of questions. So not everyone at once, but would anyone like to share a question for the good of the group that you feel you would maybe ask in your classroom? You don't have to identify it if you don't want to, but if you do want to say the type of question it is, you can do that as well. So
I would like to,
yeah.
I would have asked, how do you think they came up with the word pop to describe these drinks?
Okay, yeah.
If we've learned about onomatopoeia, for instance, they would be able to pull from that. But I don't want to say that's how they came about, but let them infer that's the reasoning.
And would you ask that to them before even reading the passage or after the passage?
I think I would like to try before just to see if anyone had ideas, because most oftentimes when I ask inferring questions to my students, they surprise me and they have really good responses.
Okay, great. And then that question could even be asked again after they've read the passage, because
Yeah,
it goes into a
absolutely.
little more depth. So I like
Absolutely.
that notion there. Okay, Nicole put in the chat a think and search question. Where do each of the terms, soda, pop, and Coke, originate geographically? So that does take some reading in different parts of the article to find that out. Coke is the South, and soda is the Northeast and the West, and then Midwesterners say pop, which I don't know. Is Oklahoma the South, the Midwest, or somewhere else? I once read an article from a now defunct literary magazine based out of Tulsa called This Land Press, where they tried to make an argument of, where does Oklahoma belong geographically in the nation? They ultimately said we were the pancreas of the United States, something like that, which was hilarious to me. All right, any other questions? Okay, one from Gayla. Who set up the first soda fountain in a drugstore? Where and when was it set up? So to me, that feels like a think and search question as well. My hunch is that that's probably going to be in the same paragraph, but not all that information is probably in one sentence. Excellent, Gayla. Anyone else want to share one of their questions in the chat or aloud? I have an example of each as well, but I wanted you all to go first. Okay, here's one from Shanda. What word do you use for a fizzy drink? And why do you think the words we choose can connect us to the place we grew up? Well, well, well. The first half of that question is pretty easy, but that second two-parter is much deeper. I like that. I grew up in Atoka County, and part of the reading program that my little elementary PK through 8 school or K through 8 school had was after reading every 5 or 10 books, we got a free pop from the vending machine, and I loved Sunkissed. And I don't really see that a whole lot anymore, but I would get a Sunkissed. And then whoever said at the very beginning something about Mr. Pibb and being disappointed, we did not have Dr. Pepper in that vending machine. They had Mr. Pibb, and some of my classmates would choose a Mr. Pibb for their reward for reading books. I no longer associate pop with reading, but for a while I did as a kid. Okay, so here's another question from Nicole, a beyond the lines question. Do new drinks like energy drinks and those advertising health benefits need a new name? And what would it be? Another very philosophical question that I think students can use this passage to kind of inform what they would say, but they may not necessarily have to have read the article to answer that. That's interesting. Energy drinks are like the new modern day healthy type drinks, maybe in the past. Why is it called a soft drink? That gets introduced toward the end. Another question. Here's one from Lindsay. Beyond the lines, were you surprised to learn how long ago pop was invented? What other parts of daily life do you think might have originated in the 1800s that are still around today? All excellent questions. They all fall into those different buckets or categories. We may not even necessarily need to see mine, but I already have the slides prepared. So I'm going to give room for one more person to pose a question in the chat or come off mute and ask your question. Wait time is important on Zoom, I tell you what. Okay, here's my PowerPoint. So I paired the passages and questions together. Can everyone see my screen? Yes? Okay. Write their question. Which ingredient was added to carbonated water to change it to soda water in the 1800s? So this passage gives us the answer that it was sodium, which that sounds terrible. Salt water? No thanks. Give me that sugar water instead. A think and search question. What are two generic beverage names that originally were proper nouns? And so this one, the answer is seltzer, because that comes from the German town Niederselzers. And then Coca-Cola is another generic name at this point with Coke lowercase. For an author and me question, this was similar to maybe someone else's earlier in the chat. How does geography impact a speaker's likelihood to say soda, pop, Coke, or soft drink? And then some beyond the line question examples based on this passage. Do you say pop, soda, Coke, or something else to refer to sweetened carbonated beverages, and why? Or how does someone's dialect impact the way you view them? And then what is your favorite word origin story? If students have a little etymology at their fingertips, which I think not a ton of them do, but maybe they would. And then finally, I've got this challenge for you all. which maybe we're mentally taxed at this point, but this is based on that soft drink section. Categorize this question based on this passage. Why is Dr. Pepper considered a soft drink, but not milk? You don't have to answer this question, but which of the categories that we've talked about do you feel this question falls into? Is it an on the line? Is it on many lines? Is it a author me? I have lost the chat, so I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see someone's answer. Okay, Lindsay's wondering if it's beyond the lines, perhaps. Any other guesses or thoughts? Beyond the lines. Author and me, says Gayla, so more inferential. And I'll model a little think aloud. Nicole says it's tricky. You need the text to supply the answer, but then you're making an inference as well. Originally, soft drinks just meant all non-alcoholic drinks, from hard drinks or beverages containing spirits. So at that point, Dr. Pepper and milk would be both soft drinks. Neither one of them have booze inside them. But if we read the final paragraph, we see that soft drink came to mean sweetened, carbonated beverages. And I have to make an inference with my knowledge that milk is not carbonated. Therefore, it's not a soft drink. I know that Dr. Pepper is carbonated. It's got those bubbles. So I think it's a bit of an author in me to get there. But the point is of this entire presentation that we're asking our students a variety of questions, empowering them to ask their own, modeling for them how to justify the answers to their questions so that they can be better readers and writers and have a stronger comprehension. Okay, so I'm going to ask you this question without sharing the screen. How will you strategically use questions and question techniques in your classroom next year, this coming school year? Any thoughts, comments? I put the question in the chat for you. It's our final reflection. Is there one particular question or technique that you feel like you're going to use in your classroom next year or share with your teachers? Maybe that's more of a food for thought. Reflect in your own heart about that. I'm trying to pull up the evaluation form on Airtable that you're going to use as your ticket out the door. You'll evaluate me in our time together. Our office collects data on that stuff. So on the slideshow, you should see presentation evaluation. There's a QR code. I'm just going to put the link in the chat if I can find the chat. There it is. So in the chat is the link to the evaluation. We also have some reflections from some of you. Lindsay says the paired question activity is very helpful to create engagement. Nicole says, I love the activity you introduced where students create the questions. Jennifer, I like the paired question activity. I think it will help students when they are faced with a difficult text and then formulating their own questions there from Gayla. So on this evaluation survey, I put the link in the chat. There are 3 things that you have to be specific about whenever you're choosing the presenter with that plus sign. Please choose me, Jason Stephenson. For the location or event, you'll just call this a webinar. And the name of the session, you can just call it questioning. And that'll let me know it was for this particular topic. So I'm going to stop sharing and I'll put that information in the chat as well to help you out. And when you're done with your evaluation, you are free to go. I'm going to stop the recording.